Ron, welcome to Wake Up Call. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. So you and
Thanks
I
for
talked,
having me.
my pleasure. So, we talked about how your upbringing was a very, you know, let's say more serious, much more restrictive religious background. And that's what you grew up with. And you had your own like feelings about that. But at some point, things really shifted in your life where you became much more oriented towards spirituality. Can you explain, like, what is it that happened and what is it about your mindset that changed?
Well, it started happening when I had gotten out of a very long-term relationship, and I was basically just, I grew up a very strict Catholic, and I thought, the whole world was Catholic until I went to high school and discovered that there were other people who had other faiths. And actually, I became very good friends with an atheist, and we always argued, about our beliefs. But it wasn't until I left an 8-year relationship that I started to like really look at who I was and like what I connected with spiritually. So I was questioning what I grew up with.
Right. And so, to a certain degree, it's kind of like, you're in the bubble and then you're kind of out of the bubble looking in. And that,
Yep.
and that is different, very different. And so as you started to do that, like, how did you view like this whole realm of like spiritual, your spiritual search? Like, how did you see that?
Well, my whole point of view of spirituality, back then, and religion was, praying. I thought spirituality was meditation and yoga. I mean, not that those aren't connected to spirituality. There's aspects of that, in those items, but it was that's how I viewed it, right? Like this place where you go and you sort of like be at peace with yourself, like things like that, if that makes sense.
And it does. And now, how generally do you look at it? How has that changed?
Um, Now I look at it as well, it's your relationship with, like who, like people call it the creator or God, um, but and it's
The
the
universe says,
universe,
yes,
energy, whatever, right?
right.
But it's that personal relationship, and it's very personal, right? So it's also like um the maybe like the struggles or the blockages that I go through. It's overcoming that, and then um growing yourself. I think essentially, you don't have to be like this peaceful person meditating, which isn't bad, right? But it's also going through your stuff and
Right.
overcoming it and expanding. I think that's my point of view now of spirituality.
That's awesome. And so as you go through that transformation and things start looking differently for you, how does that affect like the decisions that you're making in life?
Um, well, definitely, it's impacted my decisions in who I have relationships with, who I interact with on a daily basis. It's more focused on values, my decisions now, whereas before um, it was more of like pleasure seeking, whatever is going to give me comfort, whatever is gonna satisfy me at the moment, right? Like that.
Sure, sure. And now it's more values based. And so do you look for, how do you run things by those values?
Um, well, so I question, right? Like let's say like I have an invitation to go somewhere or um, to participate in something. I run it by, okay, is this going to be connected? Is this going to move me forward, or is it going to be more of the same stuff that I used to do, right? And
Right.
so base it off of that. Is it a growth opportunity? Is it aligned with my values right now.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. So it really is much more just making sure that it's aligned with values, aligned with the kind of life that you want to lead. And
Yeah.
did you notice that, like, as your perspective changed, did you notice that? No, so you're hanging out with different people who
Yeah.
you share those values with. Did you notice people treating you differently?
Well, I noticed that for sure, people who I've been friends with for a very long time, um, it's a little different now because we don't, like I don't participate in the things that I used to participate in, right? So there was kind of like a disconnect with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've noticed the that it is different, the interaction. Sometimes I may interact with them less because I am very interested in being around people who are aligned with my values and headed toward the same direction.
Sure, sure. And are people, like, generally, like, are your old friends, let's say, accepting of that, or is it just like kind of like the distance just like kind of grows? And has it, I think the more important question though is, have you noticed that because your perspective has changed, are just people with the same kind of perspective just kind of like naturally finding their way into your life?
Oh man, that's a good question. You're asking if the same people with the same perspective are naturally finding their way. Yeah, in some sense, yes, because I believe in that. I believe that you attract what you are. Like a lot of times, like people attract, like they go like, okay, I want to attract what I want, but it's what you are. So it's that internal work, right?
Right.
So I mean, essentially, people who are aligned with what you're up to, we do end up connecting and participating in things that we're interested in, right? Whereas I do have a connection with friends who I've been friends with for a long time, but it's probably not like the same kind of amount of time that we spend with each other,
Right.
if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, totally. So, like, there's this idea that, this concept of vibe, like literally it's our
Yeah,
vibration.
yeah, it
So,
is.
like, do you sense now that you're so much more attuned to kind of like your own vibe, do you sense that in others?
I do. I do sense that, yes. And it's a lot of like sort of growing through that and still having kind of like human dignity. Like I it's like you can't be a jerk if you don't want to be
Right,
around people,
right.
but
You don't
but
want to
it's
be
like
dismissive of
you
people
don't want to
right.
exactly, yeah, yeah,
That's why, like, so that's why it's such like a fascinating thing to like kind of discover your own vibe and your ability to perceive that in others. And it's like, when you make that connection, it's like, it's magical, isn't it?
yeah. It
Yeah,
is. It
it
is. Yeah.
is.
And then there's like me learning boundaries, right? Like that's a big thing for me is to like learn boundaries. Whereas before spirituality, I really didn't have any boundaries. You know?
Fascinating.
So that was a big thing for me. Like another part of it was like, spirituality, like for me before was like, oh yeah, you got to be a good person, right? Which I think overall that's kind of like where people lean towards, like where, what spirituality is. But it's for me, it's like, like I grew up thinking, yeah, I need to be a good person. But then the boundaries thing just kind of like was foreign to me. So I had to learn that. And that was part of my spiritual growth.
Right. So it's an interesting contrast because, like, we think like to be spiritual, be religious is like being a good person, but
Right.
isn't it more about just like, and speak to this if you can, like, it's not, if to the degree I'm a good person, there's nothing to change. But being on a spiritual path is more about growing. So it's kind of like getting out of my comfort zone. It's maybe looking at the things where, it's not about being good. It's just about
Yeah.
like in which ways do I need to grow?
Yeah, look, out of my comfort zone, and this is where like this is how I've discovered spirituality. Out of my comfort zone for me is setting up a boundary and being direct, and also not being a jerk at the same
Right,
time.
right,
So I had to struggle with that.
right. It's sometimes like I've heard it say like you have to say no, but it's like how you say no.
Right. Exactly. You say no
Right.
with love,
Right. You
right?
say no with love. You're like, right. Even yeah, exactly. It's well said. Really well put. And in terms of like, so in terms of your own growth and your own awareness about yourself and your values and your changed mindset and the boundaries that you're setting and the connections with people that you're making that are more meaningful because you're much more aligned internally and also aligned with self. I mean, that's a huge change. Tell me, in what ways have you made decisions that were just something you wouldn't have done before, or like other opportunities that this new approach, or I should say this more evolved approach has opened up for you?
Right. So, well, for one, so like when I started to discover this kind of spirituality, I discovered Kabbalah, and when I first started studying, this was years ago, the concept of healing kept coming up. Like, me as a healer kept coming up, and it sort of freaked me out in the beginning because it was a completely foreign concept to me.
Right.
I
I
thought
mean,
it was all woo woo.
you're not a healthcare worker, right?
Right.
So like, what does healing really mean?
Well, yeah, and it's like at a level of energy, right? Like and for me before that, I thought that was all woo woo.
Right.
And now discovering it, like I actually in the process, really connected to it, and then I became a Reiki master. Amazing. Through my studies, which was like not in my radar at all, years ago, like that kind of stuff.
Right. That's fascinating. And so that's really amazing. And what about like, other like, other organizations that you're involved with that has opened up opportunities for you?
So I had discovered in that process too, I had discovered the forum, which was it's a personal growth seminar. So I was taking a lot of that too, and in that process, I think like I had to kind of go through some changes and a lot, and going back to like friends who I've been friends with for a long time, it was sort of like this growth stage for me where I was discovering my voice. So there was a lot of kind of growing pains with the people in my life already.
Right. Because they weren't used to, they're probably used to the Ron who's a little bit more passive as opposed to the Ron who was a little bit more,
right. Speaking up, finding my voice like that, right? Which is I believe that's part of my growth. Sure. And so I did a lot of work there. And like I said earlier, I've been involved with the Kabbalah Center. I worked with a teacher from the Kabbalah Center for several years, and I also I believe that this just doing this kind of work connected me with people who became my mentors, who are really helping me with my abundance mindset, prosperity mindset, like that stuff I'd never, really thought about like before, right? Coming from the background that I came from.
Right. That's fascinating. And anything else in terms of like the work that you're doing? Are you mentoring people also at this point, in whether it's at the forum, or were you at some point?
Yeah, I led transformational workshops for 10 years,
wow.
Like with the forum. And it's, like I'm just discovering that it's paying it forward and just making that impact with people. And, this whole time I had believed I was this sort of shy person, right? Like who couldn't speak up, right? So that was like a big transformational experience for me to be able to, like stand in front of groups of people, and talk about really intimate things sometimes, right? And
sure.
and be direct with them, just like kind of like stand for their greatness. So that was a big transformation experience for me.
That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about like when you say like help them? I don't know what your words were, but stand up for their greatness. How would you explain that?
So it would be like, okay, so for me, for example, right? Growing up, I believed I was the shy person, and it took somebody who, let's say, like didn't see that in me, like a coach, to say, you're not this person, you can actually speak up, you know. And for me, I wanted, like, when I got that opportunity, like when somebody provided that for me, I wanted to provide that for other people.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So it's like once you discover your own voice, you wanted to assist other people in finding their own voice also. And
Yeah,
through that, you know, they get the ability to, you know, take control of their life and the things that go on, and live much more aligned with what their values are, because they're able to voice those values.
exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
that's awesome. That's so powerful. Ron, I really appreciate you taking out the time and joining us today. It's a really inspiring story of your own growth, and also like how you really helped a lot other people also find their voice.
David, I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.